Hello and welcome to the World Wanders podcast, your source for travel stories, travel destinations, and travel philosophy.
I'm Amanda.
I'm Ryan.
And we're your hosts.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. We are really excited to be talking today about some topics we haven't touched on in a little while, and those are ethical travel, so thinking about how your travel is impacting the communities you're visiting, and about traveling with a vegan lifestyle. So we're really excited to be chatting with Ben and Bree from itsbreeandben.com.
Ben and Bree are a married couple originally from California, and since they became a couple in 2009, they've always been passionate about travel, both locally and abroad. And so they took a long-term trip in 2017 to explore more of Canada and the US, and they soon realized that that wasn't a lengthy trip, but a new lifestyle choice, and they have just continued to explore from there. So on this episode of the show, we talk about their journey with travel, what inspired them to travel, what their trip was like back in 2017, where they went, what they did, what it's like to travel with a vegan lifestyle, some of the places that are easiest to be vegan, as well as ethical travel like Ryan mentioned. So we'll talk about how you can start traveling more ethically and everything that comes along with that. Before we dive into the episode with Bree and Ben, I just wanted to give a little shout out to our newest Patreon subscriber, Therese. Thank you so much for joining The Insider. We hope you enjoy those episodes. For those of you who aren't familiar with The Insider, it's our bonus podcast for patrons only. You can head on over to patreon.com/The World Wanders to get all access to those episodes. And we're talking about everything digital nomad life, how to get jobs, what types of jobs there are. We're talking with guests who are doing this day to day, even though we are stuck at home right now and many of our digital nomad friends around the world aren't traveling. There are still ways that you can start taking your work online in a more long-term fashion that will allow you to explore. So once again, patreon.com/The World Wanders if you're interested in that. Without further ado, here are Ben and Bree. Bree and Ben, welcome to the podcast today. We're super excited to have you here with us.
Thanks, Amanda and Ryan.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. We are super excited to dive into the conversation with you guys today. But before we get into kind of like the meat and potatoes of what we're going to talk about today, which knowing that we're talking about veganism, actually maybe meat and potatoes was the wrong thing to say. But before we get there, can you guys tell us a little bit about your travel story and kind of what inspired you both to travel?
Sure, Ben can go first on this.
Sure. Well, I myself, I always had a travel bug even when I was a kid. From like my earliest years, I'd say like 4 and 5. I was one of those like nerdy kids even from the bat who really enjoy like PBS documentaries on like the British Isles and Africa and East Asia. So just anytime something was on television that was about a new place, I was really into it. And that fascination with just different places around the world and eventually cultures led me to want to pursue higher education, international relations. So that's where I went. I studied at the University of Pacific in Northern California, and from 2006 to 2010. And there I just kind of fed that passion of just learning about the world, the cultures, and even had the opportunity to study abroad in France in 2009. And when I got back from there, I worked in Africa for a bit and really applied those skills that I learned. And then when I came back, I was looking for work and I was like racking my head, just thinking, okay, so I originally wanted to go to the State Department, but that would take another few years of school. And I really need to get a job now and pay off those loans. So I decided to kind of look to see what I could apply my skills to. And I became a travel agent in 2012. And while I had that career, I learned the tools of the trade and learned how to travel as well as how to book things as well. And that kind of led to our trip in 2017, which we will go into more.
It meshed well with what my jobs were. So I never got to travel much as a kid. So the first time I really did any traveling was I saw a couple of schools and I was doing some college searching. And so like I visited like Arizona State and like New Mexico University, and that's about it for my travel experiences as a child. And so when I started dating Ben, what was like 11, almost 12 years ago, we decided to just start exploring. And so we did a road trip before he went to Africa for a couple months. And then while he was a travel agent, I became a travel and lifestyle writer. And so we kind of utilized our combined press and work opportunities to fulfill that travel bug on a budget. And then we had this wealth of information and decided we needed to launch our own website and just wanted to leave a home base and travel on our own long term. So that's how we got started.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's super cool to hear how you guys came from kind of different travel backgrounds and then had different career paths and then were able to come together to have these trips. And so I'm curious, your big backpacking trip that you said was in 2017. Where did you guys go on that trip?
I wouldn't necessarily call it backpacking. It was more like stuff the hell out of our Prius packing.
Or a hatch. What is it? It's a hatchback, so it's hatchbacking. Hatchback.
That's clunky. Let's not go with that. But we had like a couple bags of our kitchen supplies, and we had clothes for winter and summer. And we had our electronics for our work, and like it was, we could maybe some New York studio apartments were smaller than what we configured. We had a lot. So we were able to work and live on the road and stay in Airbnbs, that kind of situation.
Yeah.
But in 2017, we did that's when we got married. And so we decided to essentially do this grand road trip as our honeymoon / get out of LA because it's too expensive. And we ended up going to Portland, Oregon and Washington. So driving up north first, then we worked our way from Vancouver, BC, all the way to Halifax, Nova Scotia, down to Washington, DC, and then all the way back. So that was our first big road trip.
Yeah, that took about 6 months total to do that whole trip.
Yeah, that's really cool. And what was it about? Was there kind of something particular about road tripping that kind of called to you guys as opposed to, obviously lots of people go, maybe like fly to other countries, that type of thing. Was there something about road tripping in particular that was kind of calling you guys?
Yeah, for me, we love the idea of just slow travel. Coming from just an education in international relations, I had always been fascinated with getting to know a place as you're traveling. And I know it's a luxury that not everyone has. I mean, we only have so many vacation days and sometimes it's a dream, but we had the opportunity to, since we were working full time, but remotely. So we had the opportunity to slow travel. And by that, I mean like spend 2 weeks in Vancouver and then move on to Kelowna and then spend a week there and then et cetera.
Yeah. And then it became like 3 weeks and 4 weeks. And as we got further on. But
it was just so appealing to be able to get to know not just a host in the place and have them be our cultural or city guide in each destination, but it was also get to know what the cultural climate was like and get to know just what issues are happening in Canada, what are some common themes that are happening throughout the world, in both Canada and the US and throughout the world. So that was the appeal of it. And that's what we really got out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's really cool. And yeah, we can definitely both relate to that kind of like creeping of the times getting longer as you start going and you're like, 2 weeks. And then you start to stay longer and longer, different places as you go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I know you guys travel as vegans. I'm curious, were you guys vegan when you first started traveling, or where does veganism play into your travel story?
So it played into our story because originally I was traveling to write a column for a magazine I wrote for in LA, and it was called Traveling as a Vegan Vegetarian. And it was still basically vegan, except for the occasional, like maybe there was egg in it, but it was baked in, so you didn't see it. Or there was like some weird ice cream. So for the most part, it was a vegan publication. And then I just started visiting more cities, going to restaurants, doing research, and then realized that there was so much more that we could explore. And we just were vegans at the time. So we just started traveling as vegans.
We started adopting the vegan lifestyle in 2015, and it was kind of by accident because we weren't big meat eaters, but we still partook in chicken and beef on occasion, particularly fish. But we went 1 week. I remember like the last week of October, right before Halloween, and we just by accident didn't have any meat that week, and we just looked at each other and I remember asking Bree, it's like, I feel kind of like I actually feel better at the end of this week. How about you? And she agreed. And so we just thought, okay, let's give this a try. But we didn't want to stop at cold turkey because we had known.
We were still unsure. We didn't even know.
Yeah, exactly. We didn't know to the extent. And we were thinking, well, maybe we still want dairy. We still want fish. So we kind of gradually took out animal product throughout the course of
the next 2 years.
Yeah, like that was 2015. So 2016 was very much transition. We cut out red meat right away, and then went to poultry, and then unexpectedly, I mean, in hindsight, it makes sense, but unexpectedly, we lost the taste and the desire for any dairy product or any fish product at all. So eventually,
by the time we were on the road full time, we was essentially traveling as a vegan anyway.
Yeah.
And then I was still writing for the column, and then it just kind of all worked out to only travel as a vegan.
So we didn't have any animal product on the trip, from what I recall. And so I guess what many people ask us, like, when did you definitively turn vegan? It's hard to say because it was such a transition over.
We didn't cut it cold turkey, so it really was over a couple of years. But it's definitely been a couple of years since we've been 100%.
Yeah. And I must say, like, a lot of people, like, one of the questions we often get is, like, do you ever find that being vegan on the road is limiting? And I would say not all. I actually found it as a conduit in which to enjoy culinary diversity a lot more, just because different vegetables are grown in different areas. So when we get into different environments, we're able to see what's grown there in particular and get to see what local chefs do there. That's really fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I was vegetarian for a couple of years and traveling throughout that. And people would often say things like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you went to this country and didn't eat any meat. Like, it's such a big part of their culture. It must have been so hard. And I think, like, for me, and maybe you guys can tell me how you kind of felt, like, I mean, I just wasn't eating that. So it's like, you don't even really, like, look at the stuff that has that on the menus. Like, it just, I mean, there was definitely countries that were more challenging than others, but I never really found, like, oh, this is so hard, because I'd made the choice not to eat meat in the first place. Has that been kind of your experience, or what have you guys kind of found?
So, I mean, traveling as a vegan definitely comes with its complications, especially if you're, let's say, food deserts, or if you're in a place where meat is such a huge part of the culture. Like, try going to Kansas City, Missouri, and not smell barbecue everywhere you go. But for the most part, it's allowed us to eat healthier on the road, experience more flavorful cuisine, and we never feel worn down by midday after, like, indulging in a meal. So it's allowed us to get more out of our day. So it just takes planning. And then there are just some places that maybe we don't stay as long because we don't have as many places to explore, or we just bring our own food and cook our own food and then see what we need to see. But it can be arranged wherever we go.
Yeah. And so had you guys, as you started that road trip, had you guys already had the website going and had been blogging, or did that start around the same time?
So we actually launched the blog on July 10th of last year.
2019.
Yeah, 2019.
For those who might be
So we had been gathering information. I've been writing for a couple other websites at the time. I've just been gathering our information, taking thousands and thousands and thousands of photos. And then as we slowed down a bit, as we were just had a bit more work, endeavors to handle, we started building the website and figuring out the exact angle we wanted to go, and then go from there. So we've been live for a year.
Yeah. And it was a good thing we did too, because, like, in my mind, I was thinking, oh, we should have a website and do that during the time. But the idea of the concept of It's Bree and Ben and focusing on ethical travel developed from those experiences. So we had to kind of experience that in order to get that. But during that time, we were taking notes. Like, I was taking basically ethnographies throughout each destination, and just making note of, how are cities kind of arranged? What common themes am I finding in each place? Or what themes are different? How people approach those different things. So by the time we got back, that
we had all of our stuff ready to write a book.
Yeah. Plus, now that I think about it, I don't know if we would have had the time to manage a full website.
We did not.
Yeah, we would not have been able to get, like, an article out a week, let alone.
I worked 2 jobs and traveled full time. I did not at the time.
Yeah, I was working full time too, basically a 9 to 5. And as the more east we got, the time zones were changing, and so my hours were shifting.
Like 12 to 8.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I don't think we could even squeeze that in. But yeah, it's when it comes to developing a project like that, it's good to kind of allow the experiences to come in, and see what you learn from that and see what you can apply it to.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that definitely makes sense. And I mean, I think that we very much did something similar, like had traveled quite a bit before we decided to start something. And I think that either way that you decide to do it is great, but it is nice to kind of like get some experience and then figure out like what you want to talk to people about and what you want to write about and that sort of thing before you dive in. And I'm kind of curious. Something that I heard a lot when I was vegetarian, and I'm sure that you guys hear a lot, is just like, oh, it's not possible for me to travel because I have these like, preferences with food. And obviously, there's tons of people who travel as vegetarians, as vegans. I'd be curious to know kind of like what type of planning goes into that, how you guys find great locations, how you decide what places you want to stay longer in, and just like anything that might look different from before being a meat eater versus, being a plant-based eater.
Well, I think even if you're not vegan, I think if you're just a conscious eater and you want to make sure you have healthy food and you're not just stumbling upon like a small town that only has McDonald's, you want to be aware of what food is there. So before we plan anything, I look to see what restaurants are in the area, what's available, what the local cuisine, as well as, let's say, the popular dishes from the region are. And if they tend to lean a bit more veggie heavy, that's great. If not, I'm curious if they do I look to restaurants, see if they do other versions. And I just see what's available. And I also now look to Instagram. There's even a bit of that. So, people are sharing all the vegan food now more than ever. And you can always find even the more hidden dishes that may not be as talked about. So there is availability in even the smallest of places. But if you really just want to go, let's say, on a road trip through the middle of nowhere, I would recommend planning to a T.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you might get stuck with a veggie sandwich with a tomato and lettuce on it and be screwed.
Yeah.
That's all vegans eat, right? It's just lettuce and tomato.
We want to eat like rabbits and just have a water bottle, and that is it.
You just get a good leaf of lettuce, and you're good for the whole day.
Right? We enjoy food, and it doesn't also. Not all of us miss the taste of meat. Some people do. I mean, some people are transitioning. Some people still love it. I like the occasional meat replacement, like very rarely. But I prefer to just experience regional cuisine without replacements, and there are plenty of options. I mean, look at Indian cuisine. And then there's still plenty of French cuisine that does not have meat and dairy. I mean, there's even like vegan bakeries now. There are the options there.
Yeah. And to kind of add to that too, and this is what we've learned on our trips, one of the biggest lessons is that planning does not necessarily mean more stress. I know that majority of people, and I know this from my clients too, they look at planning in advance as a stressor because we plan our lives on a day-to-day basis. So if you're going on vacation or trying to escape your day-to-day, why would you want to add more planning to your life? I think you had an episode with like Bob and Minna, I think, who discusses this too. And it's that if you travel spontaneously, you actually might end up missing things that you might have really enjoyed. And there might be restaurants that you really would enjoy, like particularly just blow your mind. So it's planning doesn't necessarily have to be a chore. I mean, it does take a little effort in the beginning, but you will save yourself a lot of just
FOMO.
Yeah, ultimate FOMO.
Yeah.
If you plan ahead.
Yeah, for sure. I was thinking about that episode with Bob as you started saying that, and yeah, that idea of like one. I think it is also really just can be enjoyable to do that planning process in advance and to think about this place you're going to be in the future. But then two as well, I don't know, you guys have probably been there, I imagine, road tripping and working where you're reached the end of your workday in a new city and you're both really hungry and you don't have any food and you're like, we got to eat somewhere. And then you're like trying to find somewhere to eat.
You got to have that list.
Yeah. Because then you risk finding something that's like a last resort and it's not good. And then you
out of your budget. It helps for time, sanity, and budget.
Precisely.
Yeah. So do you guys find like, what does your planning process look like as far as, okay, you're coming to a new city, you've got a couple weeks there. Is food kind of like on the top of the list looking at
Oh,
restaurants,
yeah.
or what does it look like?
Yeah, food is number one. Just because that's what I like. That's what I feel like I always remember the most. I remember the cuisine the most. So when I think of New York, I think bagels, and I think the candy shops and the sandwiches and like Hell's Kitchen. And so like I always just remember the food. So when we look to a destination, we see what restaurants are there, and then we mark them on our Google Maps, and then we look up places that we want to go to, and then mark them around. We do our research by looking at other blogs, looking at popular magazines, reading books and guides. We compile a list of what would work for us as ethical travelers. And then we schedule the day around like regions. So let's say on the east side of town, there's 2 restaurants and 4 things to do. That's day 1, and then so on.
Yeah. And on top of that, this kind of goes into how we plan as a couple. Like, we try to balance out the workload and planning evenly between us, and we plan that out according to our strengths. Bree, as she obviously has shown, is really good at finding the restaurants and the cultural activities that are there to do. With my travel agent background, I'll look into seeing what's bookable in terms of like in transportation if we need it, or if there's a tour, and lodging whenever we need to look for an Airbnb or something.
Awesome. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. That's something we've done too, is kind of split things up based on our strengths. And I feel like it's nice to, yeah, exactly. Like I think that's one of the best things about having, whether or not it's a travel partner that you're in a relationship with, or you've just got your best friend that you're traveling with, or you're traveling with a family member, brother, sister. It's like looking at what each of you does well and making that travel planning experience really fun. I think we talked about this in the episode with Bob, but there was like a couple of key moments for me along my travel journey where I missed things that I really wanted to see because I was like, oh, I'll just be spontaneous here, which is actually not my natural personality. And then I was kicking myself because being organized, I'm like, I know being organized pays off. It always does. And we found the same thing with like finding restaurants that we really like, that we're excited about. Like we really like to find, I guess, like healthier options is usually what we look for, is being able to find that type of stuff so that we're not just like starving and just have to, grab whatever. And then if there isn't something, we can look at, other options. Do we need to travel to get to somewhere we want, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, definitely on board with that.
Yeah, precisely. And it's never one or the other. Like, some people think if you're a planner, that means you have to plan to the minute or even the second. And that doesn't have to be the case at all. I mean, if you're a planner, you actually allow time for some exploration and spontaneity.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes we say, okay, from 1 to 3, we'll just see what's on this block, and then we'll kind of leave that. And then sometimes I'll mark every shop that I'm interested in and then go from there. But I kind of have to leave it open for time, because sometimes we end up talking to shop owners or to people we bumped into at coffee shops. And that way we kind of go, okay, by 4:00, I wanted to be here, but I still left time I left ourselves open to new experiences.
Yeah. And so just to kind of touch back on the travel story side of things. So you guys did 6 months in 2017, maybe into 2018. Did you guys end up going back and like settling down in California after that? Or what's kind of like from then up till now look like?
So we did the 6 months in 2017. We did another 6 months in 2018, where essentially in 2017, we hit mainly like liberal and being in friendly places. And then in 2018, we hit the opposite. So we ended up, we still hit some vegan friendly cities like Louisville, Kentucky and Austin, Texas, but we ended up going into Texas and Alabama and Kentucky and other parts of Pennsylvania and Missouri. And so that was 2018. For us. And we also hit more national parks. So we did about 12 in that 6 months as well, in Utah, New Mexico, and Arizona.
Parks and monuments, yeah.
2019, I had some family emergencies I had to handle, so we were kind of stuck in California. But we still managed to go to, where we go? We went to Yosemite and
Yosemite Pinnacles National Park,
Santa Cruz, Monterey. We hit up a lot of California places that we hadn't been to.
Yeah, actually, we realized how much of our own state we hadn't really even seen. So if we kind of just made the most of the fact that we were here. And
there's plenty to see here. That's
yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
For sure,
When people say California is like its own country, I mean it's not just economically; it's also in terms of topography. There's so many different environments here.
So we took advantage of our own backyard that year. In 2020, we had other plans, and you know what happened then.
Yeah, 2020, our plans were like everyone else's plans.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'd be curious to know like what the most vegan friendly place you've been to is. And then also on top of that, what the least vegan friendly place you've been to is.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Wow.
So I would say the best cities for vegans, like in the U.S., have been Portland, Oregon, and also Portland, Maine. Austin, Texas, Los Angeles, Philly, Washington, D.C., New York. In Canada, there's definitely Montreal, Vancouver, Edmonton. And then in the places we've been to in Europe, I would say it's pretty easy to be vegan in Budapest and where Prague.
Prague was very surprisingly so, yeah.
Vienna, and definitely Berlin.
Yeah.
There are lots of cities in the UK that are very plant-based friendly. In terms of least, oh my God. Pretty much if you go near a national park, you're not going to find anything in the US. You have to come prepared. So we always found our worst options like near Carlsbad Caverns near the Utah parks. Outside of Yosemite was absolutely nothing.
And it's
Ohio wasn't very good.
yeah, that's right. There was one
Ohio
restaurant that
bad.
served in all of
Alabama was pretty bad. For that point, we basically just only stopped in Birmingham and went to a Chipotle because that was the only thing we could do.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can always count on Chipotle for that.
Yeah, exactly. Good. If it has beans and it's in a burrito, then you're going to be good.
Yeah.
You're going to be good.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I was going to say there's actually, I don't know if you guys ate there when you came through, but there's a really good vegan vegetarian restaurant in Banff, like right in the town.
Yes. I forgot the name of it, but Nourish. Yeah,
Nourish.
Nourish Organic Bistro. They have like this 21 ingredient nachos, which are like really cool.
That was heavenly. Yeah.
Yeah, they're so good. We make a trip there like at least once a year.
Yeah, I try to like replicate it at home all the time. I'm like, whatever's left in my pantry, I'm throwing it on, and so I'm now dipping like my tortilla chips in strawberries right now.
Yeah, whenever we have a little bit of wanderlust. I just go, Bree, we could do this. We can bring Banff to us.
I'd be curious to know if it tastes the same.
Well, they definitely make their sauces from scratch, and everybody's produce will always have a slight different taste just based on soil and availability and water.
And also what tools you have. I mean, they might have certain blenders and other cooking equipment.
We're kind of limited on our equipment, so we can't really make a cream that emulsifies the same as theirs right now. Yeah.
Actually, that's kind of a question I ask restaurants too when I go in there. So I was like, so what equipment do you use? Or like, what do you do for this and this and that? They're always looking like, stop asking those questions. You can't answer that.
That's a weird question. We don't normally get that one.
Like that's also a little bit of a trade secret.
Yeah. And I'm like, oh, okay. So,
or it's just a blender.
Yeah. Yeah. That's when it's like the most humiliating. It's just like, a blender.
Amazing. I love that. And so switching gears a little bit, let's talk a little bit about ethical travel. And I know that ethical travel very much is a part of being vegan and living a plant-based lifestyle. But when it comes to ethical travel, I think first a good place is like, how do you guys define ethical travel and what does that mean to you?
That's a great question. Thanks for asking that. Because it is kind of the bulk, not just of veganism, but it's the core of what our business is. And to put it down simply, it's making informed decisions that support the destination's local economy with the intent of rendering the least amount of damage to its environment and citizens. And what I mean by damage, as in it's to make the choices to invest in small businesses and local entrepreneurs and their operations and try out local cuisine rather than just automatically going to businesses that are there that are part of big corporations or other companies that where the majority of their profit doesn't go back into that community. So that also involves like being passionately curious and genuinely curious about learning about a particular place. Not looking at destinations as just amusement parks that just entertain you, but acknowledging the fact that this is someone's home and
This is someone's culture.
yeah,
It is not your backdrop.
exactly. It's not your as Bree just put it, it's not your Instagram filter. That these are places with, people live there and their own set of values, and we should think of ourselves as guests there. And we can learn from the people that are there too about issues that are not just in that particular area, but also the things that we can apply to our lives back home.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so when it comes to like kind of taking that and putting it into practice, what is your, like, as far as, okay, you've got a place you want to go, and I'm assuming it even impacts making those decisions about where you want to travel to, but how do you kind of like put that into practice when you have a destination in mind? Like, what are the things you're looking for when it comes to planning that trip?
Sure. First and foremost, when we look, and we in our planning stage for looking to see what to do in a destination, we always look to see what's a small business and what's locally owned. So we're not going to necessarily go to the Walmarts to get like local wares or shop for clothing. We're going to stop by the vintage and antique stores to see what local wares are there and see what entrepreneurs are offering there. Mm-hmm. Also look at bookstores. I particularly like that because I get to learn. Like a lot of bookstores will have books and literature on local themes and local history. So I get more of a window in learning about a place through there too. Mm-hmm. And of course, look and see what local food and restaurant scenes are there and cafes. And this one always depends on how well you might know a local there or how well you get to know your host, but also involves just asking questions about what's going on there. If you as a traveler feel comfortable and have established a rapport with a local, don't be afraid to ask, like, so I heard like this issue is really big here. Can you go more into that? The big example of that for me was when we were in Calistoga, which is outside Napa Valley in California. I got in a conversation with a vintage store owner and we were learning more about that. And then I found out that there was a big deforestation pull or push going on with the local government there. And it caught me off guard because it was such an idyllic looking place and it prized itself on looking so beautiful. And it just struck me that the city would be considering deforestation in its just the nature around it.
Yeah, literally right to the border of the last winery.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that's important to ask those questions too. It's not to bum anyone out, but it's, like I said before, it's someone's home. And if we value these places as being special to us, then it helps us know what's really going on with these people. And let's know that we also care. And moreover, it's establishing that we're not just, as visitors, we're not just going in there and just spending money that doesn't go to anything or anywhere. We're actually there to help learn and actually take what we learn and apply it to solutions that help not just locally there, but to our issues back home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's, super important to think about. And I think one of the things that I'm really curious about in terms of your research process is how you kind of narrow in on like companies that are, I guess, more sustainable, more ethical, locally owned. Like, do you ever have a hard time kind of like navigating that information to figure out like where you want to eat or, what gym you want to go to or that type of stuff? Or what do you guys kind of look for when you're doing that?
Well, at least when it comes to the restaurants and shops on my end, I just try to, I take a look at their social media profiles. I look at their page. A lot of them will very distinctly like put their mission and their values right at the top. And I'll find out, if they donate to certain people, if they give back to their community, and that's generally how we choose our places. But at the same time, there's just some chefs who own multiple restaurants in one area, and you kind of have to go a bit bigger. And as long as you can do a bit of your research and not find anything completely at the forefront, that's like, wow, that's a person I don't want to support. I mean, we still go ahead and, enjoy our experience. But I mean, the way that people are being exposed pretty easily.
Yeah, the transparency is growing when it comes to these businesses too, and how they invest and where their money goes. There are some that are very clandestine about it, and that's when you kind of are a little suspicious.
Our gut on that.
Yeah.
When it comes to more abroad experiences, though, we will have to be more careful. But I would say the ones that tend to lean a bit more unethical have to do with food tours that maybe if you need to find out like how they're compensating restaurants and especially animal experiences. So we tend to avoid those altogether unless we know we're visiting a sanctuary. We know they take great care of them, and we know that the money that we're spending to be there goes directly to the animals.
Yeah, the zoos are the toughest thing because there are some zoos that try to do a lot of good with rehabilitation and helping maintain survival of species in their natural habitat.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes,
we're still making our decision on zoos, but we don't visit them anymore until we make our decision.
Yeah,
there definitely are a lot of unlicensed ones not doing anything.
Yeah, precisely.
Mm.
Yeah, for sure. We haven't been to a zoo in a number of years. And the last time we did, it was in Bali, and we were feeling just like going through a zoo after you haven't been to one for a while. Like there just is something that feels like very unnatural about keeping animals like in cages.
All different parts of the world in like one area.
Yeah. And one of the things that the Bali Zoo actually was doing at the time is that they only had local species there, which is one of the reasons that we decided to go in the first place, because totally for us. I mean, I grew up right by Calgary, the Calgary Zoo. Like that's where I got to see like lions and giraffes and stuff. And as you get older, you recognize like, oh, lions and giraffes like don't live in the woods here because it's freezing cold.
Or
and that's
Calgary.
Climate.
God,
exactly.
Calgary.
Like they can't like they can't survive here. Therefore they shouldn't be in our zoo. But yeah, so that's 100% one thing. But even just the idea of like animals being in cages, like I just think about, okay, so as a human, how far does the average human roam? You know, if we didn't have airplanes and stuff, probably not that far. Yet, do I want to be in a cage that size? Not really. So
yeah, I wonder if some people will change their opinion on this after the pandemic, because a lot of people are feeling closed in. And so now there's a lot of vegans pulling the argument of, well, this is how animals feel. So that's not something like we're necessarily, preaching. But at the same time, I know that, a lot more people are feeling emotions now. And I'm curious if how people's diet might change after all this.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, okay, so zoos, you guys don't do right now. And then so you check websites and just look for like articles and stuff like that. And I totally know what you're talking about, where you go to, you can kind of get a feel for like a mom and pop shop, like something that's local to that community and that sort of thing. And then when it comes to tours, how do you navigate like a tour that is ethical, sustainable, that you want to go on versus a tour that you're like, okay, they're advertising these things, but they're not actually putting them into practice?
Sure. Yeah. Great question. And it's very complicated, but you can kind of dwindle it down. First, look, if you decide on a particular activity that you want to do, so let's say, and these ones are notorious themselves, but cruises. If you're on a cruise and you're thinking about doing a cultural tour, first of all, get to know who is managing the tour. Which company is managing it, and how is it staffed? If it's a company that's run by the cruise line, or if the cruise line is managing it and determining the itinerary and all that, oftentimes all the resources and the money are going back to the cruise. It's not going towards the locals. And if there are locals who are guiding you around, then they're most likely going to be making minimum wage or even less, depending on the destination. So it's not a great way to one might think that you're investing in the local economy that way, but it's really not. Plus, it's always good to see where exactly the tour is going. So on the cruise,
and what's on the itinerary.
Yeah. You might notice with a lot of cruises, they try not to take you too far into a city from the port, I should say, or from the port, so that one, they control your moves to make sure you're back on the ship by a specific time, but also because they don't want you to really see what issues and what poverty might be going just beyond the port. So if they do take you on a tour, it's usually just in the commercial center and then right back. If they'll oftentimes kind of play it as, oh, you're supporting a local artisan by buying this tapestry that's there. most likely that artisan is getting a little kickback from the cruise company, but he's not really seeing much of your dollars. So as much as you're paying there, it's not really meaning anything to that person in the long run. They're still in poverty or they're not making much at all. So in terms of tours, I'd say look to see if there's anything that's operated by a local.
Independently.
Independent, and see who they're going to be working with, i.e. are they going to be taking you to other small business owners and other entrepreneurs in the area? And most importantly, don't look into any of the tour companies that are trying to help you get the photo op. So, one of the biggest plagues in not just tour companies, but also individuals too, is the influx of Instagrammers and just influencers who just go into an area and don't do any business, but just take the photos. And that is very detrimental for a myriad of reasons. One, no one's really, if you're just going into an area just to take photos with a tour or not, you're not cycling any money back into the economy. You're not spending any money. Sure, you're getting some coffee and a little bit of a meal, but that isn't really stretching any value towards anyone. And you're also just diminishing the value of a person's home too. I mean, sure, there might be some neighborhoods in, say, like West Philadelphia that are have beautiful murals and all, but if you're just going there to take photos and it's just saying you're there, then you're not supporting or helping anyone there out. And
you're just adding the foot traffic, and that's it.
And back to what I said earlier, you're not learning anything. You're not really learning about the people that are there. You're not learning about what issues are going on in the city, and not learning about anything that could help you grow as a person.
Yeah. It's interesting as you can definitely, we did our first couple like big trips internationally right after college. I think we were both 21, and went on a couple tours like that where you're like, you feel like very much like you're just being shepherded from one spot to the next.
Oh, yeah.
And it kind of becomes clear along the way, like, oh, like the tour guides, maybe they own the places, or like they're getting kickbacks from everywhere you're going. And then also you see kind of this, it's like this really weird thing, which I guess is kind of maybe a deeper conversation of like especially internationally, where you're going on tours that take you to more like indigenous communities or tribal areas. And those communities, it's like, it is economically beneficial to have, this type of industry, at least for certain people. But, some of those tours you go in and it's like, you'll see, a dude with like a motorbike wearing like normal clothes. And then you like go around the corner and like, there's like a traditional dance and they're like, this is how people live. And you're like, well, it's not really. And it just gets into this kind of the layers of like, where it feels a little bit,
staged.
Yeah, definitely staged, but also like to some degree, like exploitative in some ways, but also you kind of know on the other hand, it's like, oh, it is kind of, bringing some financial gain to this community. So it's tough.
Exactly.
And I think too, I mean, that's definitely, we've could list a number of examples like that. And it's always, we always try to do a lot of research on tours and stuff. And sometimes it's really hard to find out information. You kind of know once you're in it, like, oh, maybe I didn't make the best call on this, or not something I would recommend. But it's just so complicated because you're like, sometimes you are learning about different aspects of the culture, but it's just, I would prefer to learn about those things in like from somebody who like lives in that village, like to be able to go there myself and live, to be able to learn from them and have, pay for them to cook a meal and stuff like that. And there's definitely complicated aspects to it for sure.
Yeah. And no one's perfect at it. I mean, when we were learning about what to look for in terms of tours and also what areas to go into, I mean, we weren't exactly sure what to look out for at the very beginning either. And it's okay to make a little mistake here and there. But what's important is that you learn from it. So if you did go on a tour and it wasn't, I don't mean to overuse the word, but if it wasn't authentic or if it seems staged or exploitive, then
make sure you don't do it again.
Yeah, exactly. Just make a note. Just think yourself, okay, that was obviously something, not what I really came here to look for, but I know not to do something like that again. And now, more importantly, I know what to look for the next time I do something like this. Again, it's all about learning.
You learn from doing and not doing.
Yeah.
So you can kind of put that together.
And for mistakes.
Yeah, 100% for sure. And I'm curious, do you guys have any go-to, obviously your blog is a go-to resource, but do you have any other go-to resources that you guys look to for both veganism as well as ethical travel?
Ooh,
for veganism, so I reach out to local tourism bureaus just to see what's new and maybe to see if there's anything I missed. And then beyond that, I look at top sites like Voters Travel and Lonely Planet, Happy Cow, Live Kindly, Veg News, those kind of things. We'll look at some things on Instagram. And overall, I just like to see what content creators are finding and the local magazines. So like, let's say we were going to Austin, I made sure to look at the Austin magazines to see what the top lists were, what they would recommend. So I like to combine my references with professionals in media, professionals in travel, and then content creators, and then see what works well for us.
Exactly.
What about ethical travel, Ben?
Ethical travel. Let's see. It's really just asking the people directly. So if you do like again with the tour company, look to see if they have a social media page and send them a DM and just
ask questions. That's basically just ask as many questions as you can.
Yeah.
Because the ones that are transparent will give you everything you want to know, from like, oh yeah, we don't use, X ingredients. Oh yeah, we don't take this tour through here because, and then, or if they say, yeah, no, it's totally fine. Don't worry. We know what we're doing. You're like, you didn't answer our questions. So that's
or you seem dodgy about it.
Yeah.
What are the key questions you would ask there? Like, I guess I'm just thinking, where do you start? Like, because obviously if you're like, hey, are you an ethical company? They're going to be like, of course.
Yeah.
So
we're actually very shady.
So we're the most unethical tour group you could ever ask for. A tour company could ever ask for.
I would say if it's a food tour, I would ask which ones they visit, and why, how it helps their business. It's like, is there a designated part of the store that they put us, or like, what are the sample sizes? Like how much of the proceeds go to the restaurants? Or are they hoping that you come back and pay for a meal later? So those kind of like figuring out what investment are they putting into what if we want to know, like, is the tour depending on your money and tips, or is the restaurant depending on your tips there and you coming back, and just kind of learning the whole situation and how it's all laid out.
Just reading between the lines too, seeing how they answer it, seeing how honest they are.
Is there any other questions you'd ask otherwise besides food?
As a travel agent, of course, everyone always asks me about cruises and seeing like if this was the best cruise and all that. And through that, I learned what questions to ask for them. And you always got to look to see where, like Bree said, where does it go? And is this really like a true place where that showcases the culture there, or is it really just a facade that is meant for tourists?
In the future, if we decide to book like a smaller, like more ethical cruise, we will definitely ask about waste disposal, distancing, like how booked are the cabins, what resources are there day-long buffets, because we don't need that much food. Like we're going to ask like how sustainable is this?
Yeah, thank you for that. Those are really great questions. And I think that'll help both ourselves and listeners as well to get started if they're interested in, living a more ethical life or traveling more ethically, which I think, most travelers that I come in contact with are always looking to make an effort in this area. So yeah, thank you guys so much for your time and all the information. And where can people go to find you if they want to follow along with you?
So we are at It's Bree and Ben on Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest, and of course our website. We share articles weekly, and we'll also be launching a master directory of vegan restaurants soon. So because we're not actually promoting travel right now, we still want people to support the healthy and vegan restaurants in their area, or at least in the local vicinity, and hoping that they could still contribute to the small businesses that way. And we'll be expanding that into all 65 or so destinations we've hit so far in the last couple of years. So that'll be a big project we're undertaking. So yeah, it's Bree and Ben everywhere.
Amazing. Thank you guys so much. This has been awesome.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks.
To find more information, relevant links, and photos talked about in this week's episode, check out theworldwanderers.com.
If you have a question, comment, or feedback, send us an email at info@theworldwanderers.com. Join our community on Facebook at The World Wanderers or on Twitter at World Wanderers1. As always, thanks so much for listening.
Have a great day.
Bye.